Okay, so I'm going to share my screen. We have a PowerPoint. I think all of you know Robert and I are here tonight. Our purpose is to give you an update on the wastewater treatment plant project. And we have a brief PowerPoint. We also have some of the plans that show the work that's being done under the contract 1 that's already been awarded. Contract 2 bids are due on Thursday. If we want to get into that level of detail, we can. But I will start with our, let's see here. Okay, so was just checking that. Let's start with our presentation. Okay, so this is just our opening slide. So folks will recall that when we came to the village, we were originally hired in January of 2019 by the village. I believe JCO was hired about a year prior to us. And while I know this graphic is maybe a little hard to see, what it's showing us is that of the different components of the treatment plant that exist today, many of them were offline. 6 of 8 of them were not functioning or entirely offline. And that was really causing a lot of problems at the treatment plant. The treatment plant was unable to meet its discharge permit. And from an operational perspective, it was very difficult to run the plant. So in 2011, which is a long time ago, long before we were here, long before JCO was here, and perhaps long before some of you were involved in village operations, the village was issued an order on consent by the Department of Environmental Conservation for violations of the discharge permit. Hey, can folks mute just so that we don't get all the background noise? That would be great. Quickly, just for everyone's knowledge, these are just a few snapshots of the existing condition of some of the components of the wastewater treatment plant project, of the wastewater treatment plant itself. It's important to know that the last major upgrade of the plant was in the 1980s. And this facility, just like anything, just like your house or your car, it can't run forever. It's mechanical. It can't run forever without upgrades, without improvements, without maintenance. So Robert, you want to quickly walk us through what we're seeing in these pictures, just as a general overview of what the issues are at the plant that the upgrade is intended to address?
Right. And like Mary Beth said, it was, the last major upgrade was 1980, but before that, the treatment plant was built in the 1930s. There is still concrete tanks that we're using. For example, the lower left corner, that's your primary and intermediate clarifiers. Those were part of the original construction. So the mechanicals are from 1980, but the concrete is from 1930. So that's, so you have, I guess, a pretty old facility, right? And you can see the concrete, well, that's in the walkway, has spalled away, but what it indicates what how rough wastewater is on concrete. You have a constant hydrogen sulfide that's given off, and it lays on the surface of the concrete. It reacts with water, creates acid, and that's what you end up with over time. So wastewater is tough on concrete and everything else. And you can see some of the other pictures. These are inside the trickling filter, kind of the center top. Those are the kind of the dome-shaped taller tanks that you see at the wastewater plant. And the main function of these is to remove BOD. So your treatment plant has to remove, we call it biological oxygen demand. Is how we measure how strong wastewater is. You have to remove BOD first before you can remove ammonia, which is what your treatment plant is supposed to do. So these trickling filters are intended to remove BOD. And as the previous slide showed, they were non-functioning. And you can see it's basically like a giant sprinkler head, and it was over a long period of time. It's frozen in place, not used. And the other one is in use, but the media, again, is 1980, and the mechanicals are 1980. And so that's, right now, that's the situation you have. You have one that's operation, one that's not, but they both have mechanicals and media that has, we use the term, has reached the end of useful life. Which some
May
of
I interject one thing that does have to
Yep.
do with the other thing that happens a lot that contract one is looking at the headworks. So what happens a lot is there's 4 pumps that feed up to these trickling filters, and they plug up with rags and whatever else you might flush down the toilet. You see right there on the bottom.
lower right, yeah.
Almost constantly, and when they plug up, it goes to overflow, which goes to the activated sludge portion of the plant, which we'll talk about. But when it does that, you're not getting the treatment that you should be getting. So that's another reason this upgrade is important, especially when it comes to that headworks.
Yeah.
Right.
So that's a good segue. The lower right corner is your existing headworks. That's your bar screens. As you can see, the space is pretty wide, and you can see the type of rags that it captures, but that requires a person to rake them, physically rake them and put them in that bucket. And you have 2 of them, and that's how you keep it up. But it is outdoors, and it's labor intensive, and those openings can only be so big, otherwise it will clog and overflow. So
Current operations, we do that at least twice a day.
yeah, with the raking.
And that's 1, 2, 3 of them. The 2 that you see, and then there's another one.
Right. And anything that's smaller than those openings is going through, and even some rags with the flow pushes through, so that ends up everywhere, as Kyle could tell you. That's what he was saying. Those rags make their way through. They clog the pumps. They clog the trickling filter, which you see on the top. If enough of those nozzles are clogged, then it doesn't rotate. If it doesn't rotate, then you don't remove BOD. So it just has removing the rags and the sticks and everything else up front is super important in a wastewater plant. And that's a major component of the upgrades that we're doing.
Right. So just kind of a little tiny bit of wastewater 101, right? So the wastewater comes in, it has a solid component, it has a liquid component. So the more solids you can remove mechanically up front, like right now, this is where solids are being removed. The less expensive it is to operate your plant, and the better it performs. And right now, this technology, this rack technology, is 1930s technology. And so you can see, it's hard to see in this picture, but this is all rags. And if these were not scraped off and put in the little bucket, this would fill up. The water that's down here would overflow this, and you would have a big problem. So right now, these spacing between these is several inches. It allows all kinds of stuff to go through and end up in this tank and in these tanks. And that is not a good practice. It's not effective. It's expensive. It causes you to violate your permit. So that has to be addressed. And that's the reason that's the primary thing that's being done in contract 1, the biggest thing. Really quickly on these guys, whoops. I'm afraid if I hit something, I'm gonna, this basically what you're looking at, this is like a screen. You can see these are pipes with water coming through them. This is the untreated wastewater. Underneath here is what Robert was calling media, which in old trickling filters was rocks. In newer ones, it's pieces of plastic. Basically the wastewater, which has got a lot of biological stuff going on, runs through these pipes. This spins around, hopefully distributing this water equally. And you can see in this picture, it's not. Like there's a gap. Some of these are spraying in different locations in different ways. It's because of the age of it. It's just, not functioning properly. And without repair and replacement, there's no way to fix this. So it's not something that can be maintained away. But this underneath here, there's this media. The water is full of biological components that actually are growing and consuming the stuff in this wastewater that we don't want to put in the Ramapo. So this is an important part of the plant. And what you see is there's two of these guys. This one's functioning, but we would say marginally. This one is not functioning at all. This is completely rusted. You can see these plates. This is that plating is broken. It's not working. It has been working a really long time. That has to be addressed. You can't run this plant with only pieces and parts. This concrete condition, this spalling, is unsafe to start with. But in addition, so this is outside, but inside this tank, which is this, it's also crumbling and falling apart. So the need here is pretty substantial. And that's why it's a pretty, significant project. But we also have to consider that there hasn't been a major capital project here since 1980. So it is a significant project. You are not alone. There are a lot of plants that are of this vintage that utilize these types of technologies that are also currently in the same situation where they need upgrades. So Robert, you ready to move on?
Yep. Unless somebody has questions.
Right. And I should have said that. Please ask us questions as we go. If you have any, just interrupt, jump in. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this little table. Those of you who are around in February of 2020 may remember this. This is exactly the same table that we presented I presented at a meeting in Village Hall. Basically, this is the work that's been done since 2019. There was a lot done before we got on the scene by JCO and village staff to try to address things at the treatment plant. But basically, we spent the year of 2019 getting you ready to be able to design a project that could get approved by the state, that had funding in place so that you could go to bid and construct your project. And that's really what this timeline shows. There were regulatory issues that had to be addressed. There were issues of financing that had to be addressed, and those were done. I do want to point out that we were able to secure a $2.25 million grant in December of 2019 to support project costs, which I think is something that's really important to point out. So 2020 and 2021. So, I'm sorry? In 2020, we spent the vast majority of the year of 2020 designing the improvements. So in order to get to a point where we have construction contractors on site, we have to prepare design plans. Those you can think of as blueprints and a book that describes, or several books that describe the work that needs to be done. That process takes a lot of time and effort. It's very detailed. Village staff reviewed those documents at length. There were also a series of engineering reports that had to be prepared and approved by the regulatory agency and by the funding agency. So a lot of that occurred in 2020 in terms of the legwork and doing the hard work of design. And in 2021, in the spring of 2021, we had a series of approvals. Got a new discharge permit issued for the plant. It provides the effluent limits, so the limits, so what are the constituents of the water that can be discharged into the Ramapo.
And let me interrupt on that just to make a point too. So the new speedies permit that was issued didn't just renew your existing discharge limits; it made them more stringent. So besides your plant being mechanically old, now the state was asking you to treat the water to a higher level.
And we kind of had seen this coming, which is when we started talks. He wasn't clear to begin with whether or not they would, but they did.
Right.
And it's not surprising. It goes back in line more with what you see in other sewer plants along the Ramapo.
Correct. And folks may be aware, the Ramapo River starts up in Monroe in Orange County and works its way down. Eventually, once it goes through Suffern, it crosses into New Jersey. It is a drinking water source in New Jersey. It is an indirect drinking water source in New York State through groundwater wells along the way. And we've been seeing a tightening of discharge regulations all the way up and down the length of the Rampo. So again, as Kyle said, it was not surprising that you would have more stringent affluent limits, meaning that the quality of the water you're putting in the river is higher. That drives the types of technologies that you have to consider in your plant, because you now need to remove more stuff from the water that comes into the plant, not just the salt, not just the rags and those kinds of things, but a lot of dissolved constituents and other things that are in the water. So, sorry.
I just wanted to go back to the grant and the opportunities that we received from the grant funding. I want to make everyone aware, the board also aware, that the grant funding of 2.5 or 2.25? $2.25 million was, I mean, it was worked on diligently by our grant writer and our Fred Rella and Michael Genito and Delaware Engineering. I just want to make everyone aware that this process in obtaining these grants was very taxing on the village, and this is the need and necessity that we need to improve this plant. This funding source is very, very critical to this upgrade and modification.
Yeah, and to the mayor's point, to get that grant, we had to redo seeker, produce a new engineering report, and there was a lot of other additional paperwork that the village staff had to pull together. So it was a great team effort.
Great team effort, exactly what I was going to say. All right, thank you. Great.
Yes.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, that's wonderful. And just so everybody understands, it's the best kind of grant you can get. Not that all grants aren't great, but it has the effect of reducing at the end of the day what the user has to pay back to support the project cost. So it has a direct impact on what people in the village will pay to support this project. And that is just tremendously valuable.
Yes, agreed. Thank you.
Yeah. So, this is 2021. And as you can see, a lot has already happened in 2021. We're not even halfway through the year. But we started off with that new permit being issued, which fortunately we had worked with the state through the process so that we made sure that what we put into the plant to be built was in anticipation of those new permit requirements. Contract one, which is the headworks and what else, Robert? I'm missing something.
Trickling filters,
trickling filters. What bids were due on March 11th, and the board will recall that those bids were awarded. And Robert reported to me earlier that construction is about to start in earnest on those improvements. And again, that headworks becomes critical. One thing that we failed to talk about, and I'll just talk about it for a second, is I might go back here real quick to our pictures. Things in a wastewater treatment plant that smell. We have to remember that it is a wastewater treatment plant. It is not going to smell like a florist shop. It's going to smell like a wastewater treatment plant. But having said that, does it need to smell bad all the time? The answer is no. And there are many things that we can do to help improve odors. Sources of odor in a wastewater treatment plant are generally the very beginning when the raw sewage comes to the plant, and generally the very end when the byproducts of treatment, so what's left after the water gets discharged to the Rampo, there's a bunch of stuff left, that has a tendency to have odors as well. This project is specifically addressing odors in a couple of different ways. As Robert pointed out, so this is raw wastewater, like from people's houses and stuff that has traveled in pipes to get to the plant. It does not smell good. And as you can see from this picture, while there's these little covers, it is basically open to the environment and it does not smell good. The plant upgrade, this headworks, that's contract one, will replace this. And what's going in the place of this is a screening system that will be inside a building and will have odor control. So that headworks is critical for a number of reasons, but one thing is odor control, like continuous, significant odor control. It'll be a really big thing. And then the second thing is improving treatment of the plant, improving the plant's ability to treat the wastewater. So wanted to point that out. There are, I think, in the current day, and Kyle should jump in, some odors that are associated with operating this, which is the trickling filter.
Sure.
Yeah, those odors should, so there is going to be an odor control system associated with this. However, the odors should go away a lot as a result of addressing this. This thing is it's a system, one thing after the other, after the other, after the other. And water gets recirculated from way back in the process, all the way back to the beginning of the process. That's going to change. And that's also going to help odors. It's going to change to a degree, and that's also going to help odors. But we had neglected when we were here, we intended to talk a little bit about things that smell. This is going to address odors a lot. The rest of the plant a lot of the tankage, when you go to the plant, you're going to see there's still tanks that are going to be open to the environment. This tank will be open to the environment. It doesn't, these tanks, when they're properly designed and functioning, don't smell like that terrible, a lot of people, it's like rotten eggs, or some people will say it smells like cat urine, or that really, really strong, just putrid grossness. A well-run wastewater treatment plant will smell like tilled earth. It'll smell like somebody's been gardening, or those kinds of things. So this is never going to smell like, a florist shop, like I said, but this project is aimed at addressing odors. And there's a number of different components that are built into both the first phase of the project and the second phase of the project that will address that. Any questions on odors? I know it's a big deal. So this was where we were talking about what we've been doing in 2021. We also have contract 2, which is the second component, which I very generically called the biological treatment component of which is this, Robert can explain, second portion of the biological treatment and some other things, which the bids are due on Thursday. Robert, you want to explain a little bit more about what contract 2 is?
Right, basically like Mary Beth said, so the first part is the head of the plant. And like we said earlier, you remove the big stuff first and then the smaller stuff second, right? So the headworks is physically removing the rags. It also has grit removal, right? So then you have the trickling filters removing BOD, and then you get to the aeration tanks and the clarifiers. So now we're taking the pollutants that are dissolved, right, soluble in the water, and we gotta, treat them, and we do that biologically. So today you're doing it with aerated aeration tanks, mechanically mixed, but as we were noted earlier, you have a speedies permit that says you have to treat the water to a better level. You have to remove more of the ammonia, and the way that, we looked at a bunch of options, a lot of different technologies, and we came up with these, unfortunately, the wastewater world is full of acronyms, but MBBR, basically we were able to use your existing tanks, but then not build any new ones. So that was a big cost savings. And the way you can do more treatment in the same tank is by adding media. So this is media that looks like, basically, macaroni would be a good way to think about the round kind, and so it's about size of a quarter. And by adding the media inside a tank, you can treat more wastewater in the same volume, and that's how you don't have to build more concrete tanks.
I have a question. I'm sorry to interrupt. I have a question. So, how does the proposed retrofit and everything like that, how does it compare in terms of capacity to what our current capacity is or supposed to be if everything was working? Like
So your treatment plant is rated for 1.8 million gallons per day on an average day flow and 4 million gallons per day on a max day flow. So those levels will remain the same. Your actual flow going through the treatment plant, you're not close to those numbers, right? So what we're doing is we're treating the same gallons of water, but removing more pollutants, reducing the BOD, reducing the ammonia to a higher level. So in wastewater treatment, we talk about the pounds. Then is what drives the size of the treatment plant, as opposed to the gallons of treatment. They're both components, but so you'll still be with the 1.8 million gallons per day wastewater.
How again, understanding, I realize that we're not able to process all that because of various systems that are down. But having said that, what percentage of that is our average? In other words, how close are we currently to that typical average level?
So Kyle would know for exactly, but what's
your current daily flow right now is averages between 1 million and 1.1 million. I don't fully believe it for one reason, and that is those bar screens that you saw at the beginning that are with rags. The way you measure flow is actually it's called a partial flume, but basically your water level before that. As those get plugged up, your water level goes up. It's not your real flow, but it's measuring this basically head loss, which tells you that you're getting 1.1, but it might be 900,000. It's not exactly the most accurate right now, which is another reason we wanted to do mechanical bar screens.
But so the bottom line is there is additional capacity if there's more
you're
homes
at
that come online,
Yes,
things like that.
You're
That's something I'm concerned about with a lot of buildings.
1.8, and that's one of the reasons that I like this upgrade, because then you're more readily able to go to 1.8.
Right.
We had looked at, I believe it was the plug flow project, and that actually was going to reduce your peak flow, which we didn't feel was good.
So if 20 years from now, and again, I can't predict or whatever, but if 20 years from now, more people do move into the area one way or another, I know it's a small village, but things could change. Is there any provision or capability, if need be, 20, 30 years down the road, to take what's being planned for now and expand upon it to accommodate more flow if that were to be necessary in 20 years, something like that? Or is this system, they'd have to start over from scratch 20 years from now if things change?
There is some additional capacity. We don't have a number for you. Like I can't say like 1.8 to, you can get 2, right? But the treatment plant, as you can see, this is a site plan of your treatment plant. You basically have 2 of every tank.
Yeah.
Two trickling filters, 2 primary clarifiers, 2 aeration basins. So you can maximize the size of the tanks that are there to get an increment, a small incremental increase of flow. But if you're going to increase the capacity of the plant, it's a big jump, right? You would go to, and add another 1 million gallons a day capacity. If you had 3 of everything instead of 2 of everything.
I see.
It's the way you're set up.
The other thing to think about, and Robert was describing, so these tanks right here are what are being converted into that MMBR, right? Or MBBR, right, Robert?
Yeah, two Bs, yeah.
Yep, MBBR, which is a moving bed bioreactor, in case anybody is following along at home. So, and for those of you who back in the 80s and 90s played Trivial Pursuit, the media looks like those little Trivial Pursuit pieces of pie. You remember your board game piece? It was a circle with little dividers in it. And, that concept, the reason they're done that way is because it increases the surface area. That's relatively new. Back in the day when these guys were built, they just put rocks in, and the rocks created the surface area. So one of the points about this is that as time goes by, technologies become more able to treat water better in smaller spaces. So the fact that you can treat your water so much better in this same geography is because technology has allowed that to happen. So in 20 or 30 years, we may have additional technologies or additional abilities to increase treatment without adding, tremendous footprint. Old school wastewater treatment plants, this is kind of an old school one, we call them campus style plants because you've got all these different components. They're all separate in different tanks doing different things. The newest technologies do all of the stuff that's happening in a whole bunch of this geography all in one tank.
Yeah.
So there's definitely, opportunities. One of the things about a plant like this one, and we're looking at the site plan, these are the digesters, trickling filters, clarifiers. This is aeration and clarifiers. Is it takes up a lot of space, and so when we think about upgrading a plant like yours, one thing we think about is, can we reuse the stuff that's there? Because a tank that you already paid for many, many years ago is really valuable if it can be reused. Demolishing stuff and building new things is really expensive. So we try to look at that as one aspect of it, and that's the case here. Another part of this, though, is we're trying not to foreclose future opportunities to provide flexibility to do something else. So if in the future, for some reason, you get more stringent discharge requirements, or you decide you need more than 1.8 MGD of capacity, we want to try to preserve your ability to change or modify your plant. So by using the existing footprint, we're doing that. We're not, we're pretty much staying inside the lines here. But those are really good questions. Anecdotally, I would have a tendency to agree with Kyle. I think your values might be, what you're seeing through your meters might be high. And the reason I say that is because we look at the land use in the village, we look at the population, we look at the kinds of businesses and things like that. And there are planning tools that we can use where we can say, okay, what's an expected wastewater flow from this particular type of population or land use? And it seems a little bit high. So it'll be interesting once we have the new headworks in place, which is this guy. This is that screen we talked about that's inside a building, that will have better flow information and better ability to know what you have.
Yeah, so one thing to remember is, like, because of the flows you have now and the capacity you have, if you have a future project that's going to use 50,000 gallons a day, that has no effect on your capacity, right? You have way more capacity than that.
Right. The other thing that we're always careful about is overbuilding a treatment plant today in anticipation of a future user who may or may not ever come. What that really does is, it creates huge operational headaches for Kyle to try to deal with, because this is a biological system. It's like having a dog. If you have a 30-pound dog, you need to feed a 30-pound dog. If you feed it like it's a 50-pound dog, it'll get fat. That's just a fact. So wastewater treatment plants are very similar. And when you overbuild them, unless you build a lot of little compartments and escape valves and all kinds of things in there, it's really hard to operate. But more than that is that the people of today have to pay the cost of making that plant so much bigger for a user in the future that may or may not ever show up and may or may not pay the burden.
I wasn't presuming to build something that can handle bigger. It was more just a thought of, if something were to change, can it be modified in the future at a reasonable cost, is more where I was headed. And the reason I was thinking about this, the reason this came up on my mind is, and it's actually something I had presented to the mayor a couple months ago, and I followed up with on my own, speaking to a member of the Rockland County Sewer Board. apparently there's a plant, I think in Hilburn, but it's at capacity. So they don't have the capability, for instance, if one of the options in my mind was, well, if this plant is not working correctly, what's the option of using Rockland County's plant? But apparently it's at capacity, and so they told me it would be $30 million to retrofit it to support Suffern's flow. So that just seemed like a big price, more than, let's say, Suffern's plant itself, so I just was a little surprised by that number. That's all.
Yeah.
Yeah, once you start building tanks and buildings, the price really goes up.
Yeah.
And at the same time, you would need to be able to get that flow from the village of Suffern, from our headworks, from our entry point, over to Hilburn, under the thruway and under the Ramapo River. So
Actually, Mayor, just sorry to interrupt, but just to say that that's actually one thing I did discuss with this representative from the sewer authority. It was the sewer authority, not the sewer board. Apparently at the ball field, on the other side of the ball field, closer to where the gas mains are, there is a connection point to that other plant.
Right.
So we actually did have a connection point within a few hundred yards of our connection point. So that wouldn't be as big an issue. That would actually be easier.
right, if they were able to do the build out, I don't believe that the infrastructure of piping would be able to handle the additional flow requiring
That's
additional piping. That's what I'm saying. Right.
Okay, that could be.
Yeah.
Right. So to maybe helpful, so Rockland County hired us 2 or 3 years ago to actually evaluate all of that. So there is an engineering report out there in the world that describes all of those things. And actually in your engineering report, we also describe that because we're required to look at, is there an alternative to upgrade? Could you consolidate with someone else? Is there a way to eliminate your plant? So a couple things really quick. Steve, you are correct. There is a line that does run at least part of the way. One of the issues is, I believe it's a fairly small diameter line. It would not carry your current flow of 1.1 million, let alone any future flows. So that line would have to be replaced. The fact that there's one there does ease the path a bit because there's already a right of way, those kinds of things. The Hilburn Wastewater Treatment Plant, that was built probably now almost 15, maybe almost 20 years ago. We were involved in that project as well, way back when, in a land far, far away. That was designed originally as a 5 million gallon a day plant. But the decision was made because the existing customer base was only going to consume about 1 million gallons a day. So very similar to your village, that the plant would be built as a 1.5 MGD plant, but be intended to be expanded. So it was built with the idea of expansion in mind to be a 5 MGD plant. So that's the plant when you're on 87 and you get to that nice, lovely spot where you can go right and go to New Jersey or go left and head down your way. It's the big building with the green right against the highway and the Ramapo against the mountain, basically, with the green roofs, the green metal roofs. That's the wastewater treatment plant. So the reason that plant would be so expensive to expand is because it is a wastewater treatment plant that takes wastewater and turns it into drinking water. So it uses a very sophisticated, pretty high cost technology to do that. And the reason that was done was to A, meet effluent limits in the Ramapo at its discharge point, and B, because at the time there was a proposal to take some of that water and pump it back north up above what is now Suez well field and inject it back into the groundwater system. That part of the project did not happen, but the treatment plant there is it's a very good treatment plant. It's very robust, but it's extremely sophisticated and it would cost a lot of money to expand. And that is just kind of what's going on there. So, if you want more information on that one, let me know. All right, so let's see, can I go back?
A question about the cost,
Yeah,
about the grant. The grant, I was told, would actually be not money we would have to pay back. Is that not quite true?
Yes, so grants you do not have to pay back. Loans you have to pay back.
But the 2.5 million grants is not money that the village will have to pay back.
Correct.
All right, thank
Right.
you.
And the way that it works, and Mike Genito can jump in too, but you are using right now a bridge loan to pay for your project costs. That bridge loan pays the entire project, whatever the cost of the whole project, which actually I think if I go, oh, this is the schedule, but I have
Like
the
up
cost
to your bond resolution of 9 million. right?
of 9 million, right? So the project cost, which right now the budget project cost is $9 million. The grant is 2.25 million. So whatever amount of that 9 million you use, let's just say you use $8.5 million. What would happen is when the project's all done and we've accounted for every little cost, the state agrees that we've accounted for every little cost. The long-term borrowing, the part that the users, the village users pay back, would be the 8.5 million minus 2.25 million would give you your principal balance to be paid back in your long-term loan.
Right.
Yeah, that's almost correct. It's close. First of all, the $9 million we were told, by the way, the EFC this week sent us out the documents for signature for what's called the note. The note is the short-term borrowing that we will use until we come to finalize the project. Then we go to long-term borrowing. So one of the things was a minor amount, $15,000 out of the total 9 million. They're not allowing us. They're just ineligible costs for whatever reason. But of the balance, so the way it works with the grant, by the way, is that it is 2.25 million, but no more than 25% of the project cost. So if in fact we do come in at 8.5 million, the amount of grant that we can apply to that 8.5 million would be 25% of the $8.5 million cost, and the balance of it, we would be doing long-term financing with the EFC. So, once again, we did get the papers. In fact, the bond council, we signed them yesterday, overnighted them to the bond council. They're going back to the EFC, and that's actually opening the door for us now to be able to get reimbursed for the expenses associated with this project.
Great.
And that allows you to pay the construction costs, which are coming soon.
Will the grant money then come first before the project's completed, or it comes after when it's all done?
The EFC controls that, whether they pay us by grant first or whether they pay us by telling us to borrow the money or some combination. It's whatever way that they end up working it that works best for them.
Right.
And,
My understanding, Mike, is that we will draw grant dollars first.
That is generally true.
Mhm.
But again, I've had other experiences with EFC where they tend to draw the grant money first, but then whatever reason they will say, well, we're going to have a short-term loan for this amount. And maybe that's related to the estimates that they're looking at in terms of the final, the final payment of the project. Again, if you were going to assume 2.25 million and then you didn't actually spend 9 million, they can't quote give the grant money back, if you will.
Right.
Right.
Well, that's
Yeah,
an
that's how
interesting
that would
question.
work.
So if they gave us the full 2.25 up front, and then we only spent 8 in the end, we wouldn't owe that back? The let's say 0.25?
Yeah, first of all, they don't give you anything up front. It's a reimbursement grant. So
Okay.
we have to incur the expenditures, and then we can submit a payment request to them. And then it depends on the timing of it. If all of our documentation is complete, and you never know if it is, because I'm sure that Delaware has seen this before, you'll submit some paperwork, you think you have everything that they've requested, and then their legal side or someone else says, by the way, we need something else.
Yeah, there's always more, right?
Standpoint or whatever. So bottom line is, let's say the contractor gives us an invoice, we have 30 days to pay the invoice. So the first thing we have to look at is, do we lay that money out, or can we get the reimbursement request in on time and get the reimbursement back? My experience with EFC and getting the reimbursement is that if everything is in order and they're not requiring anything additional, it does come fairly quick, like within 2 weeks. So hopefully we can work it that, we don't actually have to lay out cash. We can receive the invoice, approve it for payment, process it with the EFC, and get the reimbursement to pay the contractor.
Right. So one of the things that we'll do, and I don't think we've quite gotten there yet, but we're real close with contract one, is we will come up with a schedule for the contractor for when they need to get their paperwork to us. So that, because you typically do a draw once a month. And ideally, as Mike said, you don't want to use your own money, you want to use theirs. So in order to make that happen, we have to look at, okay, if we're getting contractor payment applications, we have to review those applications, make sure that the contractor is asking for legitimate money. We have to approve them or deny them. We might do partial approvals, whatever. Then that goes to you, the village, who then will make the request. And so we have to understand your process internally. What do you do to make that request to the EFC? I agree with Mike. In my experience with them, if we have paperwork to them by Thursday of any given week, under prompt pay, they have to pay in 14 days. But generally, the cash hits the account the following week. So as long as we organize ourselves properly, we should be in a good position to pay the cash flow of the project from EFC program funds. And then, the only issue, as Mike and Robert chimed in on, if we have a contractor, particularly if we have contractors who have not finalized all of their administrative paperwork with the state, then we can submit it to the state, but the state can say, nope, we're not paying that contractor's bill. We'll pay the other bills, but we're not paying that contractor's bill because they simply don't have their paperwork done.
Yeah,
And there's
on our side of the coin, once you have all approved the payment, it then goes to Charles Sawicki. Charles, as the board knows, comes before the board with a request to authorize payment. And once that's authorized by the board, then my office gets all of the paperwork to process the payment. And it's at that point that we would put together whatever we had to with a reimbursement request to the EFC. In the odd event, or in the event that the EFC says, no, we prefer that you make the payment to the contractor, that can often delay things because then the EFC would require a proof of canceled check and a copy of the bank statement showing that it cleared. And that could take whatever time it takes for the contractor to clear the check and all. But in any event, we'll handle it. And I don't have any concerns about this project. It's going to move forward, but it's not going to move so quickly that we're going to get a multi-million-dollar bill in 1 month.
Right.
Right. Right. But it is, Mike, it's really good to understand that your process is that what comes from our office will go to Charles. Charles goes to the board, and then that goes to you. So basically, we need to schedule our contractor getting us paperwork monthly such that we have time to review and approve or get modifications from the contractor, get it to Charles in advance of a village board meeting so that Charles has time to review it and get it before the board, so we can sequence that. So that's important to know. But ideally, and I will say in most cases in our experience, we've been able to do these projects where the community has not had to front money or pay a contractor and wait for cancel checks. So ideally that's the way that this will go. And that is, I would say in my experience, typically the way that these projects go.
And I'll speak for the board. Hopefully nobody has a problem, but if it needs to be a special meeting to get this done and get the ball rolling, I don't think anybody would have a problem with having to have a special meeting to approve anything. So that therefore the village is protected as well as everyone else.
Right.
Just one thing, we during our pre-construction meeting, Rob and his staff were there. We had established with the prime contractor on the 15th of each month to submit his application
There you
so
go.
that Delaware could review it, we could review it, and then get it in front of the board workshop, and then, of course, approval at the board meeting.
Perfect. That's
Yeah,
great.
right. So we want to shoot for the workshop, not the board meeting. What's the key?
That is perfect. So I skipped a couple of slides here. I'm just gonna go back real quick. So bids due for contract 2 Thursday. The rest of this is all stuff that has happened. Contract 1 is going, as Charles and Robert just described. Really quickly, this does meet your consent order schedule. This is the most current compliance schedule. We
In our breath,
requested.
we're looking at the drawing instead of the schedule. So if it was-
Oh,
Yep.
sorry. Hang on. Let me see if I can. Let me kill that. Wait a second. If I just do. Okay. So many things to swap back and forth.
It was a nice drawing of your mechanical screen and your brick removal, by the way.
There you go. So now are you guys seeing the PowerPoint?
Yep.
Okay, great. Sorry about that. Let's see here. Okay, so the work that we're doing is in conformance with your consent order schedule of compliance. We were to submit engineering plans reports by the end of the year. That happened. Notice to proceed to construction is supposed to be by September of this year. You're going to beat that schedule. You already have one notice to proceed out. We would anticipate, and we'll get to next steps in a minute, that the other notice to proceed will go out before that September 30th, and that would be for the contract 2. And then completion of construction, May 31st of 2023. So here's those next steps. Receive bids for contract 2, May 20th, which is Thursday. We'll review those bids just as we did with contract 1, prepare a recommendation for award. We can do that relatively quickly. I put a kind of broad time frame in there because we'll need to, obviously go over that with Charles and others and make sure everybody is, on board with that. Here I had in the schedule that awarding contract 2 by the village board would happen either at your June or your July meeting, depending on how quickly you're prepared to move forward. We would issue notice of award and then eventually notice to proceed for contract 2 in probably July. And that will certainly, meet your September deadline that you have under your consent order. And then construction administration inspection work that we're doing for contract 1 right now, that we'll also be doing for contract 2, will occur over this summer through the end of next year. And then closeout would occur early in 2023. And we would support, Mike and whatever else is needed to get to that long-term financing, because there will be paperwork needed for that, so that we meet that deadline of May of 2023.
Mary Beth,
Yeah.
does contract number 1 need to be completed before we begin contract 2?
No. Yeah.
No.
Yeah. So, but basically, as you remember from the site plan, contract 1 is on the right-hand side and contract 2 on the left-hand side. So it'll be a very crowded place when
Okay.
lots of contractors, a lot of construction. And of course, we have to treat the water during all those times.
Yes.
Yep. So that'll be something for the board to come and do a site visit when everything is going on down there. It'll look like ants crawling all over an ice cream cone on the sidewalk. It's a nice image, right?
I have a question. You had mentioned in one of the slides, there was a lot of concrete that was damaged that needs to be replaced. And then you implied that that would also be true inside the containers where the water is sitting for to get the work done. Does that mean that part of this plant has to come offline to work on those?
Well, it has to come offline half of it. Again, like we saw, your plant is set up, you have 2 of everything.
Yeah,
So 1 of everything has to come offline in order to do the upgrades.
I see.
So
So
you'll take one trickling filter down, fix it brand new.
So I imagine you'd be fixing the one that's not working currently at first. That would be the plan, right?
Yeah, unfortunately, that keeps switching. But yeah, so we'll fix the worst one first, because you'll be operating with only one side for a while. And so we want to give Kyle a fighting chance.
Can you guys see that image of the plant?
Oh no, we're at the PowerPoint.
Yeah, PowerPoint. That is another reason that we broke this project into 2 phases, phase 1 and phase 2. Phase 1, we started ahead of the plant to give the rest of the plant the best chance that we can. We also need the trickling filters performing the best that they absolutely can to make sure that the activated sludge portion can be taken down 1/2 at a time.
So basically you have 2 side-by-side plants and you can do construction on one side while the other is taking care of the sewage.
Essentially, everything is built in pairs so that you have some redundancy.
Right.
One of the issues with the plant currently is that redundancy is very limited.
Okay, well, I didn't hear that. What'd you say?
That redundancy is very limited
Can you
currently.
explain more about that?
Well, if you have those trickling filters, those pumps plug up, I lose a trickling filter, which puts all the stress on the activated sludge portion. If I have an activated sludge clarifier that goes down, that puts extra stress on the other 2, and I have to take that down and work on it. Inevitably, what will happen is I'll have one of those go down, and then a trickling filter pump will plug up, and then I've got minimal at best treatment. So the rags and that kind of thing, they really get through your entire plant, and they really kind of make everything a mess and much harder to work on than it needs to be.
Okay. I've sort of got it.
I mean, I don't want to go, there's a lot that involves with it, but if one thing starts to go down and then another thing goes down, and then you just don't have the plant. And that's another reason that we wanted to do the upgrade, because it really gives you a lot more resiliency inside of the plant.
Okay.
What happens if there's a failure on the one side that's working while the other side's being rebuilt?
So that is a major concern of ours. That is one of the reasons that I believe Joe Hunt and his guys, Joe Mack, we revisited before my leave. We were going to actually start welding some more support to one of the ones that keeps breaking on us, because we just can't have it break down while we're doing this work. It just can't happen. So we're doing what we can. And that is another thing that we're going to revisit with Delaware when we get to contract 2. You know, we have very general plans, what we need to do, what needs to come offline in what order, but it's going to be a very important step.
We're trusting you, Kyle.
But we really have no contingency, it sounds like. If
there's some things that we can do if one goes down. The thing that Delaware Engineering stuff does show is that when those trickling filters are back up and operational, they'll do a large portion of that treatment for us, more than 90%, which will put a very decreased stress on that activated sludge portion. And we should see ammonia treatment start in the trickling filters at that time. So it'll give us a lot more ability. That's why we did this in phase 1, and then activated sludge will be in phase 2. So that is one of the things they are starting with in phase 1, is going to be that broken trickling filter, actually.
Yes, actually, that's ahead of the schedule, right?
Yeah, we did. Yes.
So what I mean is, it's the very first thing they're going to work on.
Yes.
Right. I mean, sometimes, so treatment plants are built, as the guys are saying, with redundancy. Your plant was intended to be a plant with, 2 of everything, each at 100% capacity. But it was built a long time ago. The capacity of these when they were designed is one thing. Their actual ability to treat water today is much diminished. And so that just creates a problem. And as Kyle said, there's a lot of cascading effects. One thing breaks, another thing breaks, another thing breaks. We do have, as part of our consent order, interim speedies limits, that, so we don't have to meet those very stringent new limits right away. But the plant is challenged to meet those interim limits right now, even before construction starts. So we may have some drama as we go forward. We're going to do our best to avoid that drama. But this is not an atypical situation with plants that are of this age and of this type of design. It will not be the first time that there are these kinds of issues. Our objective is to have a plan in place to avoid major problems. But when you have a plant that components were built in the 30s and then some of them last touched in 1980, it's pretty fragile. So let's see. I'm not very good at switching. Can you tell I'm not very good at switching between things here? I'm getting better at it.
You've done a great job of explaining what's going on.
Okay, well, thank you. So this is our next steps, right? So receive bids for contract 2. The contract 2 schedule, but meanwhile, construction on contract 1 will be continuing. And we're in compliance with everything thus far. We talked a little bit about project budget. It's planned or potentially a $9 million project. We do have that $2.25 million grant, which, as Mike pointed out, is 25% of $9 million. The grant language is we can receive up to 25%. To a maximum of $5 million, but because of the size of your project, 2.25 is the max we could get. Soft costs, which are all of the engineering, legal, all those kinds of things, are estimated at this moment. Contingency, we always keep contingency in a project because there are things that we just can't know. Hopefully we don't have to go into contingency and use contingency. If we don't use it, it's not part of the project and you don't have to pay for it. But we do keep contingency. Contract 1 was altogether 3 contract packages that added up to $3.277, basically $78 million. That is pretty much as anticipated. Contract 2 bids due on Thursday. The one thing I will say is if folks have been watching the news or if anybody out there is involved in contracting or frankly building a doghouse at your house, you know that construction prices have gone up on labor and materials. And so we've done everything that we can regarding the potential construction prices, but we have seen an escalation in construction prices. Just since we bid contract 1, there's been an escalation. So, we will, when we get the bids in, we will review them closely and evaluate what they show us, and certainly report back to Charles and the board regarding what we see.
Is 3.278 million for phase 1? Contract 1 rather, is that on target, above or below, somewhere, give us an idea?
That was on target for contract 1.
Okay, that's good.
Yeah.
Yep, exactly. So the balance is intended to pay for contract 2. So that's the general idea.
But everything you're hearing in the news is true in terms of steel, wood, everything.
Everything. There are strange shortages of things that go way back to when factories in China shut down in late 2019, in November and December of 2019. Things like thermostats for baseboard heating units are nowhere to be found. And that goes all the way back to factories that made thermostats in China shutting down in November of 2019. You may hear on the news there are no car production in the United States is way, way, way down. And that's because of a lack of semiconductor chips that are used in the manufacturing of cars. We're seeing things like aluminum window frames are on back order for months and months and months and months and months. You can order them, but they're on back order. So like Robert said, what you're seeing in the news is unfortunately real.
Things that normally would take 8 to 12 weeks to arrive are taking 20 to 24 weeks. So it's bad.
And so I think, so we've covered a lot of ground. We're about an hour in here. Are there questions, more detail that you'd like? Obviously we encourage the board or anyone to reach out, ask us questions anytime you have them. We're always available, to answer questions. We're always available to meet. I think, Kyle, we can set up times if folks want to come and walk through the plant, and there's nothing like real life so that you can see the conditions and understand what's going on there. So I guess I'll leave it at that. If there are questions or anything else you'd like us to cover.
I think it's a wrap.
I'd like to say thanks. Thank you to Delaware Engineering, Charles Sawicki, Kyle, the men and the operators down at the wastewater treatment plant for working for the last couple of years at trying to put a great remedy to our needs here in the village of Suffern. And I think we definitely are on the right track. So thank you for all your hard work.
The water plant and your street department too.
And the water plant and street department, everyone involved, working together was great. And it's going to be a great success for Suffern. Thank you.
That's the old phrase. It takes a village.
Yeah.
And Kyle, congratulations again on the baby. I'm so glad everything went well.
Yeah, that was exciting.
Yeah.
I'm super excited.
And you better be really nice to your wife, because that baby he's a big boy.
Yeah. Yep. No, she's already talking about number 3. I was like, well, what?
Brave woman.
She's brave. I think that one went really well. Our first one was tough, so I was surprised we went for 2, and now she wants to go for 3. So I'm running.
Wow.
I'm hiding upstairs right now.
Hey.
Mary Beth, I had a question. I think most of my questions have been answered here, and I thank you very much for your diligent, time that you've taken here. But just looking out for the public who may watch this later, from the recording, if they wanted to reach out to you, if someone from the public had a question, is there some sort of email address that the public could use if they needed to?
Sure. They can always send it to me, although my email is incredibly long. So our generic email is info@delawareengineering.com. And if you say it's Suffern, that will get to both me and Robert, and we'll be able to respond. So it's info@Delaware, like the state, engineering.com. And no, we're not from Delaware, the state. We're from the Delaware River watershed in New York State.
Thank you. I just, like I said, looking out for the public in
Sure.
case anyone had any questions. Thank you.
But they should also let the village board know what they're asking, Steve. So that way, maybe they should funnel it through the village board and we can forward it on. Actually, so that way we understand what the questions are that the public is having.
I would agree.
Right, the public certainly, can you hear me?
We hear you. We hear you.
Yeah, obviously the public has an interest in this, but it really should go through the village. If they have a question, they should go to either Charles or the mayor, and then over to Delaware, I would suggest.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Thank you, Rob. All right, is there anyone else have any questions or comments?
Thank you very much for all your time.
All right, thank you,
Welcome.
Mary Beth.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kyle,
Good night,
Charles.
everyone.
Thank you, everybody.
Motion to close the meeting, I'm sorry.
Motion.
Well, Ed,
Trustee Barone.
Ed, I'm sorry, did you want to discuss the interviews, setting a time for interviews when we have everybody?
What, I'm sorry, what was that?
For the comp plan, I spoke with everybody individually except for Fred. Sorry, Fred, I couldn't get through to you. The game plan would be to interview 4 of the proposers. And in speaking to the various village board members, I think most, and this is why I'm just bringing it up now, most would prefer to do it like one night, like from 6 to 8, a half hour each, something like that. So if you want to pick a day next week or.
For
or
the,
7 to 9, whatever you guys decide. That's why I'm bringing it up now.
Okay, so
I'm okay with that.
we'll put a couple of dates out there, see when the board's available, and then we'll have that discussion with the comprehensive plan overview. Is
Perfect.
that good, board?
Okay.
Yeah.
Good.
Okay.
So can you put those out tomorrow?
The dates?
No. Yes, I'm sorry. Yes.
Dates.
Dates, yes.
Okay, yeah. All right. We'll
I mean,
take it
can I
from
just throw two out, the 24th or the 26th, or the 26th or 27th?
there. Sure, hold on a second.
Of May or June?
Of May.
May. Just to do a quick, it would be Zoom. I think we'll still be authorized to do Zoom meetings.
looks
They're
like
both good with me.
I'm good for both as well.
I'm good for both.
It'll take me a second to get there, but I'm sure I'm fine. I think I'm good
24th.
for the rest of this month.
24th.
It's a Monday.
No, he said the
I think it's a little tight.
27th.
Yeah, I think that's a little tight for the presenters. I'd like to give them a week or so to.
Right, okay, I'm just clarifying the date. What are two dates?
26th and
26 or 27.
Okay, gotcha.
And 7 o'clock's better for me than 6.
All right, so we'll do 7. If if everybody's good with, is the 26 good with everybody?
Yeah, 26th is good. I was just checking.
All right, so I'll schedule them each starting at 7, 30 minutes, and I'll speak to Michael about setting up the Zoom meeting, et cetera.
Can't figure out what I'm doing.
Thank you.
So that's a Wednesday, correct?
Okay.
Is that the Wednesday?
Yeah, Wednesday the 26th, starting at 7.
Okay.
Not available that day.
Oh, okay.
I'm not available the 26th or the 27th.
Okay, so we could put it to the following week.
Yeah.
What about the 25th? Is too tight?
I'm not available 25th. I have a board meeting elsewhere.
Got it.
So the June 1st is the workshop. Could we workshop it?
That's going to be a 5-hour meeting. We need at least 2 hours with these people.
5 hours. That's a long time. Okay.
No, we need it. Well, a half hour for each one would be 2 hours.
Right. And then we have our workshop.
Is there a lot going on in
Right,
the
on top
workshop?
of
That the workshop could just be an hour?
Yeah.
Yeah,
If we
but I
combine it.
think you're better off squeezing it into one day, one workshop, limiting the agenda, June 1.
Okay.
I'm good with that.
Bring your lunch.
So the workshop's at 7. Should I tell them? I mean, don't forget, we're going to have to tell them, should we, starting at 7:30. So the last presenter will be at 9 if we say start at 7:30. If it's 8, you know what I mean? Should I say 8 or?
7:30.
All right, we'll say 7:30 and we'll do the, like the old FedEx commercial and rush through the workshop, right?
Yes.
That's a,
All right.
that's a joke.
I think that's good.
Okay.
All right.
Okay.
All right. All right. Sounds good.
All right.
Motion to close.
Motion.
Trustee
Trustee Alpert.
Barone.
Trustee Barone, second.
Trustee Alpert.
Again.
Trustee Alpert, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye, motion. All right, thank you. Have a good night.
Thanks, Mary Beth.
Thank you.
Everybody.
Bye.
Congratulations once again.
Robert.
Kyle.
Yeah.
Yes, congratulations, Kyle.
Thank you.